All right, as we come down the home stretch of college football's toughest division, the SEC Western Division, we've got the state of Alabama 0, the state of Mississippi 2, with Mississippi State winning that game against Auburn, and also Alabama being upset by Ole Miss, but we still have plenty of football left to be played. But with two of the best teams in the nation, Alabama and Auburn, playing a bit from the backseat right now, needing to win out to get to the college football playoff. It should be mighty interesting, headed to the Iron Bowl and the Egg Bowl on the same weekend. We bring in Jamie Hancock of Preps Nation to specifically address Auburn football as they prepare for a date against South Carolina. Jamie, we appreciate the time, and it's been too long.
Mark, I enjoy coming on with you every time. Obviously, it's been too long, like you just said, and our busy schedules have clashed a little bit along the way. This time of the year is very tough for each of us, I believe, so I'm very pleased to get the opportunity to come on with you.
Folks out there that need some more analysis, possibly looking back at last year's BCS Championship, if you want to see some and hear some real solid nuts and bolts breakdown of personnel on the field and schemes, check out our posts, preview, halftime, and post-game of the BCS National Championship, Auburn taking on Florida State. But let's look forward to a date with South Carolina on the road, with the Tigers taking on South Carolina. But let's first look at the first 6 or 7 football games here, with Auburn able to play themselves into the mix as we expected as a national championship contender. Sure, there was the letdown at Mississippi State when they got themselves behind the sticks at 21-0, but a fine effort on the road at Kansas State against a team that's the front runner right now for the Big 12. So looking at what is the dominant stamp of this football team right now, Jamie, obviously it's the running game, looking at how they dominated last year. How would you compare last year's dominant, best-in-the-nation running game versus what they brought to the table through 7 or 8 games this year?
I think this Auburn team has faced some scrutiny in the running game due to how dominant they were last year, as you said, and that's a little bit unfair to try to hold them to a standard that was really thought to be unachievable. What they did going down the stretch last season, only running the ball 9 times at Tennessee, and the things that they did in the SEC championship game. So that team was elite and special, and really a one in a lifetime type team running the football. This team, however, does not appear to pose the same threat for several different reasons, and it starts up front. You know, no Greg Robinson. Sean Coleman has done a good, solid job. He's a fantastic story, coming back off of leukemia, and the young man has been good, but he hasn't been Greg Robinson good. They lose Kyle Kozon, the freshman All-American, at the left guard position that started all last year before the season started. The guys that have filled in for him in several different spots have been solid. They just haven't been quite Kozon good. They've had some injuries on the right side of the line that's caused a big shuffle between when Patrick Miller went out. Avery Young has moved back and forth between guard and tackle. And then the loss of Jay Prosh is something that will go understated simply because he's a fullback, and most people they only recognize him when they see his big arms. They don't really see what was going on in the formation. And then Trey Mason was a dynamic player. I think he showed a little bit of that this past weekend with almost 100 yards in his first real action for the Rams. And Cameron Artis-Payne has been good, but he just hasn't been Trey Mason good. And it's just they're a little bit off-key all the way around. And not to mention, teams are taking away the speed sweep or the jet sweep to Cory Grant that has really stretched teams out. They're coming up with a few different things that have taken some of that away from the Auburn attack, and it's a little bit of everything. And so far, I think they're a little disappointed in how they've handled the new things on their offense.
And again, they spoiled us, no doubt, with a rushing attack that hit Alabama for over 300, hit Missouri for over 500 in the SEC championship game, a Mizzou defense that had 2 NFL defensive ends and was giving up guys like Mike Davis to 30, 40 yards per game, and then Auburn hits him for 500 plus. So that was, a special outfit when you had Greg Robinson at left tackle, and again, Trey Mason at running back, and it was all just working with Jay Prosh leading the way from the fullback position. Let's talk about Nick Marshall, because specifically the quarterback gets all the attention, but with this situation, it's okay. Nick Marshall's good enough to take us to a BCS championship game. The running game can't be as dominant because of what we just cited. Marshall's going to have to get better. That was the talk the entire offseason. by the Auburn community. Your thoughts about Nick Marshall's development as a passing quarterback?
I think Nick has settled in pretty well. You don't see the absolute frantic pace in his eyes when you watch him play the quarterback position right now. Things seem to have slowed down for him just a little bit, and that's what happens after the process that he went through of being a defensive back at Georgia, going to a junior college that hadn't been uber successful, taking over an offense and just being Mr. Everything, where he comes to Auburn, he's there 2 weeks, and everything was really fast, and it looked that way sometimes. I think over the offseason we felt like he was going to make these huge strides, leaps and bounds, and we haven't seen that yet, but I see a maturation process in him that typically is about his footwork. If his footwork is good in the pocket, then he throws the ball well. If he reverts back to some of the things that he did at Garden City or even last year for the Auburn Tigers, you see some errant passes. He is more polished this year than he was last year. The biggest thing for him is the running lanes are not as wide open as they were for him last year, because right now it's he and Cameron Artis-Payne in the backfield, and you're really only challenging 2 of the 3 pressure points that they were working last year, because right now the jet sweep look with Cory Grant has been non-existent from what they've done defensively, as well as some of the deficiencies with Auburn's new personnel.
Yeah, the defense, I think we both agree, was undervalued last year. It wasn't a dominant defense, but it kind of took the hit as being carried by the offense, and I don't think that was necessarily the case. They held Jameis Winston down in the championship game. You take away the last drive, which you can't, of course, but you also take away a kickoff return. They really didn't give up that many points to an offense that was scoring close to 50 per game. This season, they lose D Ford, obviously, and they lose Lawson as well, and he was counted upon as the D Ford replacement coming off an exceptional freshman season. So your thoughts about the defense as you take us through the units from the line play back to the secondary?
The biggest challenge up front for Auburn is in the front 4, like we talked about. The loss of D Ford, he was a wrecking ball coming off the edge in the passing game, and that allowed the freshman Carl Lawson to be a secondary rusher on the right side of the defense. Well, this year Lawson was going to take over. However, the knee injury sidelined him, and I think that along the way in the recruiting and the process of going through college football, Auburn had some misses as a speed rusher, and they had injuries. 2 speed rushers basically had been injured their whole Auburn career in Justin Delane and Kamiah Harrell, both basically underperformed due to some injuries and basically left the program in a sense. And so you're left with Lawson as your main speed rusher with some experience. Well, now that Lawson's out, you're relying upon guys that are mostly 3 techniques up front, like they opened up with Montravius Adams and Gabe Wright some at defensive end. They're both 285, 290 pounds. They can play a 5 technique as an end and do a good job at that. But asking them to rush the passer in a pure passing situation is very difficult from the outside. And they're doing some things right now that are a little bit out of desperation, but it shows the coaching staff is trying to address the needs. And they're looking at bringing Brandon King, a free safety outside linebacker type, at about 6'2", 215, 220, is going to line up outside some as a defensive end and rush in passing situations. And he's a kid that came in, played a little bit last year. He came in from one of the junior colleges in Kansas. It escapes my mind at the very moment. But he's one of those guys that's a good football player. They get a freshman back that was another speed rusher that's been out and missed the last 3 games, and Kennan at the other defensive end spot in those situations. He's about 6'6", about 230, so he's lanky as well. But they both provide something that they haven't had the entire year after Kennan went out, which was some speed off the edge.
All right, Jamie, this South Carolina football team, along with Georgia, was considered a favorite in the SEC East. It was about 60-40. If you really looked at the national pulse on this Eastern Division race, a lot of people like Georgia, but South Carolina was right there as well. They come out of the gate. They get stopped by Texas A&M. They rebound, look like they'd be a division contender, but they've lost to Kentucky. They lost another game to Missouri and blowing a 13-point lead down the stretch. So they're kind of out of the division race. Still talented football team with a veteran quarterback who's been around a little bit and one of the top running backs in the nation in Mike Davis. So there's obviously talent there being in the SEC. Your broad view thoughts on South Carolina.
I think South Carolina is finding out a little bit about what Texas A&M is finding out about right now. Everybody at Texas A&M was happy about Kenny Hill after their first game, and they were excited about him. They're now finding out what Johnny Manziel really brought to that football team. Now, is he 59 points different against Alabama? No, he's not. But you're finding out that it is very tough to replace a really dynamic football player. And a lot of people didn't realize that South Carolina's quarterback, Shaw, was a dynamic football player. He was a guy that he was never the biggest, and he was never just absolute the fastest guy, but Georgia Tech recruited him to run the option. And so that tells you what type of athlete he is. And he's a guy that could have played wide receiver or safety at almost any school that would give him a chance. He was that kind of athlete. He wasn't going to burn the 40 up, but he was quick and he was elusive. And he threw the ball well. His family was a coaching family. So he was a young man that was very, very much a big loss for South Carolina. And nobody's feeling that more probably than Mike Davis right now, because Thompson is not the running threat. He's not going to stretch the defensive end and the outside linebacker and allow Davis those cutback lanes. And so I think that's the biggest things that you're seeing right now for South Carolina. Also, Bruce Ellington is a guy that they leaned on a lot last year, and he's now, I think, playing with the 49ers in a kickoff return capacity, and I think some as a receiver. So they lost a good bit of talent on the offense that took away from what they want to do.
Yeah, in a conference of star quarterbacks, Connor Shaw was certainly overlooked. Maybe my favorite stat from last year was that this kid threw 24 touchdown passes with 1 interception. So he was always a threat running the ball, but he definitely progressed as a passer, took care of the football, and still made big plays. And if you saw the Capital One Bowl, they don't win that game without Connor Shaw against Wisconsin. So he was an exceptional quarterback and very much undervalued. Jamie, what are you working on these days?
Right now, I'm in the middle of my football recruiting season in a sense. I've got several programs that I handle all of their recruiting film and distribution for the coaches and the athletic directors, and I'm very busy with those programs right now, creating the films, the mid-season films, getting ready to move towards the end of the season films. The ones that are going deep into the playoffs have to wait a little longer for them, but it's a very busy time of year on the recruiting front, not only for the colleges, which we read about, but the high school kids that are looking to get their stuff out there. The coaches are really working hard to try to find a way to make that happen and give good quality at the same time. And everybody's not playing Division I football. There are 150 Division II programs, and there are about 100 NAIA programs out there, not to mention a fantastic number of Division III teams that are looking to stock up teams for the upcoming season. So I'm extremely busy and working on those, and always looking to talk to more people about possibly helping their kids out.
All right, we're joined by Jamie Hancock of Preps Nation. We lean on Jamie as a football mind and breaking down personnel and the strategy on the field. We appreciate it, Jamie. Thanks so much for joining us to break down this Auburn football team.
I appreciate you having me, Mark. It's always a pleasure.